Buenas. The 8th special session of Imina 34 en la legislatura en Guahan is called to order. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to adopt the 8th special session agenda for March 8, 2018.
On the motion to adopt the agenda, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to waive special session agenda items 2 through 6.
On the motion to waive special agenda items 2 through 6, are there any objections? No objection. Motion carries. Clerk, please take the roll call.
Senator Adda. Present. Senator Uggan. Senator Castro. Speaker Cruz. Senator Espadon. Senator Esteves. Senator Lee. Senator Morrison. Senator Muñoz. Senator Nelson. Senator Rodriguez. Senator San Agustin. Senator San Nicolas. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to waive special session agenda items 8 and 9.
On the motion to waive agenda items 8 and 9, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I move that the message from Imagalahin Guahan be appended to today's special session journal.
On the motion to append the message from Imagalahan Guahan to the journal, is there any objection? No objection. Motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I move to waive special session agenda items 11 through 13.
On the motion to waive agenda items 11 through 13, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries.
I move to excuse members not present for today's session, special session.
Is there any objection? No objection. Motion carries. Senator San Agustin, you are recognized on motions.
Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to place Bill number 248-34 LS on the second reading file of the special session agenda.
On the motion, notwithstanding the House rules, to place Bill 248-34 on the second reading of the special session agenda, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, motion carries. Is there any other motion? We're still in motions? Any other motions? All right, we are now on the second reading. Senator San Agustin.
Madam Speaker, I ask that we move to the Committee of the Whole and that we invite the Director of Department of Revenue and Taxation.
On the motion to resolve into Committee of the Whole, is there any objection? We'll take a 2-minute recess while we resolve into Committee of the Whole.
Thank you.
Committee of the Whole is now called to order on Bill 248-34. I'd like to recognize Senator Joe San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Camacho, this morning at your testimony, you have identified that you would support Bill 248 provided that amendments were made on the bill. Could you please explain to us your amendments?
Basically, I recommended two amendments. Because the bill didn't specifically state anything on the provisions for administrative provisions for the general sales tax. I looked at that, and basically, if you look at all the other articles, they referenced Article 1 of Chapter 26. So they adopt Article 1 of Chapter 26. So to be consistent, I recommended that we adopt that provision of Article 1, Chapter 26, to apply to Article 7, which is the general sales tax. And those are the guidelines there that would apply to things like sales tax, what the definitions of sales and gross income, and all other things that we can see on that article.
So basically, Mr. Camacho, you're saying that with this amendment, it basically gives you the rules of engagement on sales tax. Is that what you're saying?
The general provisions that we can guide ourselves to actually, and also I failed to mention the other amendment, which is basically to declare when is the general sales tax due, which I basically made it consistent with the other articles of Chapter 26 to basically include the general sales tax, that the taxes are due on the 20th of the following month. So that's the other amendment that I made.
But under the general provisions, the first amendment you requested would give you the basic rules and regulations governing what the bill initially asked for, correct?
Yes, it will give us the basic rule to, the way I looked at the statute, basically the first one, levy, which means that you're very following the levy on the BPT, which is basically that you're looking at personal property, service, business, including but not limited to professional service, contract service, banking and lending institution, foreign current service, insurance service, and tourist-related service at a rate of 2%. So it's almost identical to the application of the BPT.
Okay. With this amendment, and if this bill was to pass, would that give you the instrument to go after the internet sales? Would that assist you in your pursuit of the internet sales taxing?
The internet sale, I think we all agree that one of the reasons why the use tax, we couldn't deal with the vendors to withhold the 4% on the use tax for internet sales is because there's some exemptions that apply. So what this sales tax would do basically would be that we can probably work with the vendor, like for example Amazon, to see if they can collect on behalf of the government the additional 2% general sales tax. But keep in mind that if we do this, we would have to really repeal the use tax, because we can't have two things. But we're not even collecting on the inner sales on use tax, so I think we can work something else. We can work something out in the long run to actually address that issue.
All right, thank you.
Right. Is there any other senators who wish to ask any questions to Mr. Camacho? Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Camacho, basically, you're stating that we should address the sales tax as a separate issue aside from this measure before us. Is that what you're trying?
Well, first thing, this bill would give us the mechanism to actually, if it's in there, to actually work something out. The only thing that I see here is that we have an existing use tax that also applies to that, but generally on internet sales, we're not even collecting that. So it's really giving us, if it's in this bill, if this bill were to pass, it gives us a leverage, to work on something with sales tax, for internet sales tax, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you're saying with the existing statute with the use tax, this measure would allow you, with the existing statute of the use tax, to be applied to sales tax. Applied to internet sales tax. Is that correct?
It will give us the leverage, yes, to give us
Okay.
something to work on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Are there any other senators who have any questions? Senator Nelson?
I just want to confirm that I heard right in the public hearing today that it would take 30 days to implement this tax.
Say it again, 30 days?
30 days.
I think the rules and regulation, it's still there, so basically we work on that, the rules and regulations. So, but one of my proposal, when I recommend to amend this bill is to take out that provision to give 30 days to work on the rules and regulation, because Article 1 gives the DRT the authority already to make rules and regulations. So we can, when this bill, if it does passes, we already have that authority under Article 1 to make rules and regulations to any taxes that are governed within Guam,
So we just
local taxes.
we would just have to decrease the amount of time it would take for you to promulgate the rules and regs.
That's the thing. If you go that route, it's going to take probably a little bit longer to adopt rules and regulations than the normal 30 days that this thing is saying.
So instead of 30 days, we give you the flexibility to push it out in maybe 15 days or less. Is that what you're saying?
I know the rules on the AAA, I guess, process is that we have to actually, go through the process of having a hearing, and then, from that hearing, we give it, after the hearing, we basically submit that rules and regulation to the legislature. So, we move that fast. We can probably work something out.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'd feel more comfortable because we know that no matter what tax we pass, we won't be able to see the revenue stream until April 20th or beyond. So I'd feel more comfortable if we had a definitive timeline, if we're going to implement sales tax, on how long it will take to apply this, to all consumers on our island. So if we can get a definitive timeline.
Yeah, the thing about it is that bill basically at the end, it basically saying the effective date is, I guess, effective upon enactment. So that's something that we're looking at. So
we cannot get a definitive timeline from DRT.
Say it again?
If the enactment was effective today or tomorrow, what is the timeline?
I think we can work something out. I think the only thing that I would probably look at are the businesses. Are they, for the implementation of the sales tax? I think there's something that, the businesses that would have to adjust, giving them the ample time to adjust. But if the law says effective today, then it's effective today. And then we can work things moving forward.
You're still not giving me a timeline, a date.
Timeline for?
If it's effective today and to implement and enforce, how long will it take for the rules and regulations?
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Effective today, how long will it take for implementation for DRT to have accountability and enforce these measures? Because, and the reason why I asked this, Mr. Director, is last year we passed a bill for the tobacco tax stamp, and we gave it a 90-day timeline of implementation, and up to today, it's still not implemented. And so I just want to know if we have a definitive timeline, like something concrete, something quantifiable in numerics, like 5 days, 10 days, 15 days, you know, what can we do to make sure that we see this revenue stream sooner?
I think for our side, you know, because if let's say it's effective today and we adopt this amendment to make it due and payable, for example, today, and so if the amendments that I made basically would apply that the taxes are due the following month, the 20th, then we have ample time to make those adjustments, the forms to basically look at maybe amend the BPT law and below it create a 2% sales tax to be reported. I think we have sufficient time to actually probably make that and shoot it out to all the businesses that this is the proposed form that will be tracking all the 2% sales tax.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator have any questions? Vice Speaker?
Thank you. This morning, there was a representative from the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association who said that implementation of a sales tax was not going to be that easy for the businesses because of having to, I guess I don't want to put, you know, I don't want to paraphrase incorrectly, but you were there, you heard her testimony, and she said part of it was, you know, what they needed at their point of sale, and other concerns that she had. What is your response to her concerns? You think the businesses will be able to do this? I mean, if, let's say, Department of Revenue Tax is able, do you think the businesses are going to be able? This bill says it's effective upon enactment.
That's something that, you know, if this law were to pass as is to be effective, that's something that the businesses would have to work on and basically, you know, I guess for those people that have a system that can create the 2% sales tax, basically they won't have any problems doing that. It's the other businesses that probably don't have that capability of doing, but if the legislature is trying to give a little bit ample time, that's something that maybe for those businesses that are not capable of doing it. But when the law passed, this Trump Tax Act passed, it basically just, you know, changed a lot of things, and you know, things can happen. Withholding rates were issued. The new rates were issued January. Things got started. So it just really what the legislature wants to do with those businesses that don't have the capability of having that automatically adjustments, you know, that they can actually just say, I want a 2% sales tax on my business. But you know, when I look at things, this sales tax is something good because it's basically gonna really give a lot of compliance for our department, because now they're up, you know, when they actually sell, they have to produce those sales tax, and they actually have to actually take those sales tax and transfer it over to the government the following month. It's almost the same as the occupancy tax, where taxpayers come in and they occupy the hotel, and then they withhold 11%, and then that 11% is due the following month. So I think we can work something towards some amendable solution for those businesses that don't have that. I think maybe there's something that we can work on where they can actually I mean, if they already have a system that accounts for 4% gross receipts, I'm pretty sure they can quickly do something to take that same amount and apply the 2% sales tax and make it and show it to the consumer that I am collecting the 2% sales tax for according to this law that was just passed.
Is it mandatory, Mr. Camacho, that the sales tax be shown to the consumers? The bill doesn't say anything about that, but is that, I mean, we talk about it as if that's the biggest difference between the sales tax and the gross receipts. The gross receipts is not shown to the consumers. It's technically a tax on the business, right? And so the sales tax, when we talk about it, is a tax on the consumers. But yeah, are there any rules as to how that has to be done, or not really?
I think the clarity of that, the concept of this that we're looking at is that the bill calls for almost everything that is in the BPT, not limited to. So we're looking at that if somebody were to come in and buy, they charge the 4%, not charge the 4% is there on the BPT. That same amount can be, addressed to include a 2% general sales tax to show to the consumer that the 2% is imposed on that particular sale.
So as the bill is written, as you said, all the, this would apply to people getting QCs or businesses that are currently getting QCs if they sell, for example, health insurance premiums. Those would be subject to the sales tax?
I would assume this bill doesn't address any exemptions.
So banks?
Unless there's exemptions, then I think it would apply to all. I mean, I don't see an exemption on this bill.
All right. So it would apply to banks?
I believe so.
All right. I'm just asking because this morning there was some talk about that from the people present at the hearing. All right. And do you agree with the estimates of how much could be collected?
When we talk about sales tax, and I'm going to basically just say that when you take the BPT gross receipts and you exclude the wholesale activity and you exclude all the exemptions that are allowed under the BPT, I think when we run that figure, I think it can generate, based on BPT numbers, we can probably generate about 5.4 million monthly. In other words, all I did was I took all the gross receipts that's reported, not allow anything on the wholesale, and make it apply to all other activities. And when you apply the 2%, hold on, the 2% sales tax, 1% is 5,000. That's 60, yeah, sorry. I think you'll come up, if it's 2%, it'll be double. Because 1% is, I believe, 5 million. You'll come up to 60 million for 12 months. So you'll double that 5 million, you'll probably make at least $10 million monthly.
And so do you agree with the 2% versus 1%? You prefer the 2% than the 1%?
The 2% on the bill, yes.
And the allocation of 1% of this 2% towards certain agencies as opposed to being put together to deal with the entire government of Guam's shortfall?
Yeah. As the bill specifies, yes, it applies.
And you agree with that?
1%, yes, to the deficit for the general fund, and the 0.75 to GMH, and the 2.5.
So how much would the 1% that's going to go to the general fund, how much is that for the next 6 months, let's say?
For the next 6 months, 1% basically is, you're talking about the application right now, but let's just start in April,
trying to find out if we have a $67 million shortfall and we're only going to use 1% of sales tax to address that, we still have a
the end
gap.
of the fiscal year, that's basically, if we start April, then you got You got about 25 million, yes.
That's 42 million left. 67 minus
Yeah,
25.
That's for 1%.
Right,
Yeah.
correct. The 1%, and that's all that, according to this bill, is going to be allocated to the general fund obligations.
Yes.
Okay, and the 42, do you believe the government of Guam then is able to make $42 million worth of cuts? Because I thought they had come in with a fiscal realignment plan that said they were going to make $47 million worth of cuts. But then as the discussion went on, it sounded like they were not sticking with that number, and they were talking about $30 or $32 million. And so what do you expect, how much do you expect them to cut?
I think that question should be referred more to the administration, but I think we did mention 30 million, if I recall, and I stand correct if that's not the right amount. That should be addressed to the administration. But from all the discussion that we're looking, I think we're looking at 30 million. I think that's something that.
If they're only agreeing to cut 30 million, then even with this tax, they're still short, right? To make up for the 67 million. All right, I have no further questions. Just wanted to clarify those. Thank you, Mr. Camacho.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Camacho? Senator San Agustin?
Mr. Camacho, just trying to refresh your memory. In the past few days, there's a $67 million shortfall, and that the administration identified that 37 million is the reduction that the administration was willing to absorb, and that I think it was Senator Espadon identified that we needed $30 million is what we're looking for, and with the 1% that you've identified, it would give because if you look at the I don't know if you have a copy of the chart, but the 2% was supposed to bring in 121, but we only got 6 months left, so it's actually $60 million. And if you take the 30 million, which is 1%, that would cover the shortfall of the government, and then the remainder would go to split up between GMH, the 0.75% and 25% for DOE, correct? That's what you were looking at, because this is pretty much almost identical to the BBT, but it's not the business, it's to the consumer. I need to turn on.
The amounts are, when you talk about the sales tax and the BPT that was proposed of the 2%, it's almost the same thing that we're looking at as far as the numbers.
And one of the reasons for the sales tax was that it'll be consumer that's going to raise it, and that many of us have spoken here that we were worried that the price of goods are going to go up because of the anticipated cost of the increase of the BBT, and that with the sunset, we all who have experienced it in the past, and I've experienced it quite well, I'll never forget that, the prices goes up when the BBT went up, but when the business privilege tax went down, the prices didn't follow. And that's why I think most of my colleagues here are not supporting a sunset. And by the introduction of this sales tax, which doesn't set a sunset and that it will continue, then we can anticipate, based on the presentation earlier this morning, is that for the remainder of the year, we estimated about $60 million for the remaining 6 months, and that half of that would go to the general operation, because the $37 million cuts will still stay in place for the remainder of the year, and the other 30 million would be split up, 75 for GMH and 25% for DOE. Are we pretty clear on that one, Mr. Camacho? I can provide you a copy of this if you want.
Yeah, I got to look at that. I want to make sure before I.
Okay, and then on the same token, when my colleague Senator Terlai brought up the effective date, because of the provisions, the general provisions, and even my colleague Senator Nelson brought up, is that when can you implement this? When the rules of engagements or rules and regulations are produced, and looking at general provisions. And like you mentioned, you need to talk to the businesses, communicate the business, make sure they're on track. So you're actually looking at, it won't really go into full swing until the end of the month. Is that what you're saying, pretty much?
Pretty much, basically, if a law passed, we try to develop the forms and communicate with the stakeholders. So basically, you know, coming up with the forms and calling in, you know, the businesses to look at the application of this bill, if it becomes law. You know, those are the things that we'll be doing, a meeting with them. We did that a lot to all the other different businesses that when a bill is passed, we communicate with them. Like, for example, the limited gaming law that passed 4 or 5 years ago, we call on all the stakeholders that actually are going to be imposed on this new limited gaming tax, and we sat down with them and actually created the form and how to report the limited gaming tax. Those things that we'll be doing. Same thing for the general sales tax.
So the number of what is your estimated number of days then to make sure that everybody is in sync with the law? Because even if we implement it today, it won't go into effect until how many days? How many days until they will start collecting the 2%?
It's basically on the effective date. I mean, if the law passes and the effective date of this bill, it'll kick in that date. I mean.
Okay, so we can understand that on their when they file their GRT every 20th of the month, because the 20th is going to come up. Then the Department of Revenue and Taxation will be looking at, let's hypothetically say this bill passes. It's the 8th today. 12 days from today, if the governor signs it immediately or 10 days later, when they file their GRT, they identify the amount of sales they got. So you would expect that 2% should be added on what they report, and that they pay the 2% because they supposedly and they should have collected the 2% sales tax. Am I correct?
Yes, and this is where we get together with Department of Administration to track those revenues. So basically, if we develop a form, whether we basically develop a new form or incorporated the sales tax into that BPT form and call it a BPT general sales tax form for reporting purposes, those are the things. Then we got to make our adjustments in our system to track and enter this data into our system. I think we can even develop with our vendor to include the sales tax as part of the online BPT filing. We have one right now for the BPT. We can make it more convenient for all the businesses that when they file it online, they can also basically report the general sales tax online together with the BPT, so we can actually, you know, get everything at one time.
But would you like to recommend that the effective date then shouldn't be upon enactment? Because you're talking about reaching out to the business, that we actually bring the date to the end of the month or the 20th, or wouldn't you want to come up with recommend a date of when we should enact this, or how many days later? Because initially it was 30 days for you upon enactment to put the rules, and then hopefully after the 30 days you would have the rules that you're talking about, the reaching out to the businesses. How many days are you looking at that this can actually be fully in effect? Because I can picture and I can assume that if a business is not ready for this, when they file their GRT, you will be, upon enactment, you would be expecting to see that there's 2% on sales tax already in their GRT, and you would be minusing it on their GRT report, separate 4%, 2% going down. But if the business didn't collect the 2%, then the business will end up paying the 2% sales tax because they didn't comply with this. Am I correct? I just want to make sure that we're being fair to the business. When they're going to collect something, if you're saying you need to give them time, then please tell us what would be your recommended date of enactment so we can make the amendment.
I mean, if the body wishes to make this effective immediately or effective in a certain date, I think we can work towards that date and try to get the businesses to impose that 2% sales tax on that particular date. So, I mean, if you say it's effective upon signing of the governor, basically we can, you know, from there we should be basically looking at the different forms, communicating with the business, because simply what this thing calls for is basically the BPT is there already. And when a sale is made, the business will actually pay 4% of that sales with the same amount that they actually sold that particular person. A general sales tax will be also imposed of 2%. And then, you know, we can go from there.
So you're not really worried if the business doesn't collect it from the customer, because of the bill was passed and is effective upon enactment, you're not concerned if the customer paid it or not. Businesses, just make sure you give us the 2% sales tax. Because that's what I'm hearing, and I just wanted to make sure that we allow the opportunity for the business to understand this more, and like to ask for your recommendation, if you're recommending that it be at the end of the month, or 20 days, or 10 days of enactment, because trying to be
I mean,
reasonable-
that's the, you know, the body. I mean, if the body wants to give that grace period effective date, that's something.
I'm asking for your recommendation, sir.
My recommendation. I mean, to me, it's really, if it's effective immediately, I think businesses should be, you know, in accordance with the law, follow the law, and you know, and start collecting the 2% general sales tax. That's basically what it is. I mean, if you decide to give a grace period, you know, then that will be the effective date.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tom Eda, and then Senator Esteves.
Going back to this issue about the effective date, so when does a tax month begin? The taxes have to be paid on the 20th, correct?
Oh, no, before the 20th. So every month, that's why I amended the section on returns to include the general sales tax to be in compliance with all other taxes, that Article 4, 5, and 6, and even Article 2. So they all be in the same month, and we do all the same time. So if we make it effective anytime in March, then from that date to March 31st, they would have to report the sales tax that they collected for the month of March, and they have from April 1st to April 20 to actually file that and pay over that general sales tax to the government of Guam. So every 20th of the month it's due.
So the 20th of the month is when they actually have to make the payment to the government.
Yes.
But is it, I guess what I'm trying to follow is, are the sales that a company makes, let's say from March 1st to March 31st, that's the taxable period?
Yes.
Okay.
Every month. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Every month, from the beginning
from
to the end, right?
From all the local taxes, from BPT, which is GRT, liquid fuel, alcohol, even tobacco, and even use tax and occupancy tax, they're all due on the same date.
But unless I'm not following, it seems that if we make it effective upon enactment, so let's say the legislature passes this today, the governor signs it into law tonight, how do we know? So then what you're saying then is, you know, so the first week of this month, should the revenues that were taken in should only be subject to the 4% BPT. The sales that are generated starting tomorrow to the end of March, the taxes that are due on it are the 4% BPT plus a 2% sales tax, correct?
Well, the BPT, because it's in existence right now, they would have to report from the 4% from March 1st to March 31st.
Correct.
And it's due by the 20th of April.
Understand?
So the effective date that they would have to report for the sales tax is the effective date, let's say it's effective tomorrow. From tomorrow to March 31st is what they have to report and turn over that sales tax to the government of Guam by April 20.
But what happens if that businesses, if the revenues of that particular business, if the bulk of it comes in during the first week of the month, and then the remainder of the month is really minimal, but we're still going to charge him, we're still going to charge that business the 2% on the bulk of that revenue, as an example, which occurred prior to the enactment of this sales tax. So where I'm going with this is that then maybe what may be much easier, I guess, to get our arms around is that the effective date shall be on the 1st of April. Because otherwise, how do we know if he reports $100,000 sale for February, and he says 90,000 of that was generated between February 1st and February 7th, right? So I mean, how do we? That would be one heck of a headache, as opposed to we just says, okay, starting April 1st, it's going to be a new ball game. Well,
the application of the sales tax is basically any transactions occurring in any day that basically when title of property changes from the seller to the buyer. So whatever transaction happened on that day would be recorded as a sales tax and also a gross receipt tax. So whatever is generated on a daily basis will be reported, the following month. For whatever, I know that some businesses don't have any sales for certain days, but some sales are probably high on other days. But whatever occurred, whenever a sale occurred and title passes from the buyer to the seller, is considered a sale. So that would apply. In other words, if a sale occurred today and the personal property transfers to the title to the buyer, then that would occur. In other words, the collection of the 2% would occur.
But isn't, Mr. Camacho, isn't the tax that we're talking about a general sales tax, such that then if I generate sales, it's whatever that amount of sales is times, and then you add a 2% tax to it, as opposed to for each item you add 2% to it. It's just a bottom line. You add 2% to that bottom line, correct? Just like you would for the BPT. So that brings my point then to, okay, I think so I would like to amend the effect on section 4, page 3, that this act shall be effective on April 1, 2018. So therefore then at the beginning of that month, there is no question as to whether that revenue was generated prior to this bill or afterwards. And I guess, for the business that doesn't use the point of sale, cash register, or whatever that records everything, I don't know how that works, but it seems a lot cleaner.
Yes.
So that's
Amen.
my amendment then, that this act shall be effective 1 March.
Is it 1 April?
Well, what do you mean? We're in March already. April 2018, or the 9th special session, whenever.
Okay. On the ADA amendment to change the effective date to April 1st, anyone on the amendment? Are there any objections? Senator San Augustine? did you-
No objection at all.
Okay. Any objections? Okay. Motion carries. Senator Ada, you still have the floor.
Oh, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Camacho, you had stated previously that based on BPT numbers, you estimate 121, and that's at 2% of current BPT. So if you take the collections on BPT for, let's say, the last prior year, what you did was you took 2% off of that gross on what you received, right, to estimate what a provision would look like in this bill?
Again, BPT does have a lot of exemptions, so when we apply the sales tax, I don't see an exemption, so it's going to be a little bit, the amount on the sales tax is going to be a little bit larger than the BPT.
And that's what I'm asking. The 121 million you had said earlier, is that incorporating the potential additional revenue of the non-exempt, of the businesses that are exempt under BPT?
You're talking about the sales tax, the 2%, right?
The projection for the
Projection
sales?
on the sales tax.
Yes.
Yes, I think if I recall, when on a 1% sales tax, it's about 5.4, 5.3, but on a BPT, it's only about 5 or close to 5. So that's the difference on a monthly basis, on a 1%.
The per annum amount, or the
So
annual amount without any exemptions is 121 million?
If you multiply that 5.4 times 12, that would be the amount.
All right, because looking at it, I mean, if you look at the public auditor's report, and if the members need, I'll request a recess, but if you were to look at the public auditor's report, looking at exemptions, she had estimated the BPT we received was around, I believe, was about 121 million on the gross, was it? I mean, I'll confirm that number. But what I think is, I'm not sure if your projections are correct, because what I'm getting is closer to, if we were to collect a 2% sales tax on those businesses, we'd be looking more at an additional $45 million if you were to remove the exemptions, or if the businesses didn't have the exemptions that currently have it on the 2%. And that's based on the 4% of, 35 million. And that's based off the 70 million that we give out annually on exemptions under BPT. So at 4% on the exemptions for BPT, 70 million, 2% of that is closer to 35 million. So I just wanted to ask again, do your numbers reflect that revenue?
I'm going to try and pull out my data on the sales tax and BPT. Okay, on the proposed sales tax, basically, on the reported gross receipt of around 7.6, I believe, 7.6 billion. And basically taking out the wholesale of 1.1 billion, a 1% sales tax will probably generate around 65 with no exemptions, in other words.
65 with no exemptions.
Yes.
And that's based off historical data?
Based on that FY 2016 reporting data.
Okay, can you run me through those numbers on the FY, because my calculations are a bit different. Can you go over retail on that 2016 reporting data?
Retail?
Yes.
The retail that's reported is about 2.8 billion.
All right. And that's prior to any exemptions, correct?
Prior to any exemptions,
On retail,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
Service?
Service is 1.6 billion.
Million?
Billion.
Billion. Construction?
Construction local is 848 million. And that's local, and US is 51 million.
Insurance?
Insurance is 228 million.
And I think the last category is other, correct?
Others, 50 million.
So prior to exemptions on a blanket 2% sales tax, should be the sum of that times 0.2, correct?
No. What I did basically is because the way the bill read is it applies to everything.
Yes.
So from category 2, from retailing, service, rental, real property, rental others, professional, commission, insurance premium, contracting local, contracting US, interest, amusement, and others are all, if you were to add all these things and multiply that with no exemptions, it's going to come out with, excluding the wholesalers, it's going to come out to about 65 million.
Why would we exclude the wholesalers under the sales tax? Because it's
just a sale from.
But I'm saying the provisions of the sales tax under this law, because this is creating a new tax, doesn't provide an exemption for a wholesaler. Therefore, it would apply to them. So that's why I was asking about your revenue numbers again, which probably are closer to an additional 30 to 35 million without the exemptions. Would you like to?
I mean, if you were to a 4% on a wholesale will probably generate 40 million. Half of that is 20 million. You can probably add another 20 million if that's what you're looking at.
I'm not trying to add it, Mr. Camacho. I'm trying to look at the current bill, which I'm saying doesn't exempt it. And I just want to caution, because the numbers you're putting out on the record and to this body need to be as accurate as possible. So what I'm just cautioning again is going off projections based off exemptions that don't exist in the legislation before us. So what would your final number be, Mr. Camacho, on projections?
On the projection,
with the bill as it stands, no projected exemptions.
in other words, like I said, we not including the wholesaling and taking the gross receipts of everything.
Mr. Camacho, again, we're talking about the bill before us.
Okay.
So it would be including the wholesaling and including anybody else that gets an exemption in which the sales tax will now apply to at 2%. What is our final figure?
I don't have that number because I have to basically, this data that I have is basically excluding the wholesalers, so.
But I'm just trying to figure out why we would exclude the wholesalers if it's not in the bill. Mr. Chairman, if it would please the chair and members of this body, I would like to request a recess so that Rev and Tax can get accurate numbers to us, because I think it's very important that we understand what the total number of projected revenue is as we make the determination, especially on the topic of percentages and appropriations.
Okay, I think Senator San Augustine may have a response to that, if I
I'd just like
recognize
to
him.
comment, Mr. Chairman, that when we developed the numbers here with my crew, my staff, we use what was reported on the what was collected from the business privilege tax revenue, and use the 2% on top of that. I understand exactly where Senator Esteve is coming from. Maybe I need to amend it that the levy would be basically the same thing as what the BBT was collecting. And that's where the 2% was generating, and that's where I came up with the numbers. So I understand exactly where you come from, because if I'm correct, I don't think the bill even says that there's an exemption, or if any. But that's how the numbers, how I generated the numbers, was based on what the BBT was collecting, and then adding the 2%. So it may be construed as an assumption that whatever is exempted today will stay exempted, but the 2% would apply to any other, to the industries identified that Mr. Camacho brought up: the retail, services, construction, rental, insurance, and others. That's how the PowerPoint was presented, on that basis.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chairman, again, I'd just like to reiterate the point that in deliberating over this measure, I really believe that we need an accurate projection. I understand it's not a science, but there is enough data available to generate an accurate projection on what we would be looking at in terms of revenue, because I think it's very important when addressing any type of tax increase measure, whether this body knows whether or not there's going to be additional revenue that we haven't accounted for in terms of appropriation, because I think it would make an important determination whether it's a 1% or 2% or a 1.5 or a 2%, if we can get closer to the projection. So again, I ask for better projections based on the bill as it reads, but I also caution that I don't believe that it's as simple as saying everything you did with the BPT, just do it with the sales tax, because the language in the different statutes codified in Guam law are very specific in how they mention these exemptions, and to include QCs. So I think we need to be very cautious and meticulous in how we construct the language to apply or to exempt these businesses from the sales tax. So again, I ask if we can get accurate projections.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Committee of the Whole is back on. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Okay, I'll yield to Senator Tom first before I.
Yeah.
Senator Ada?
I just want to get clear in my mind. I'm not a tax guy. I don't know anything about these things, but it seems to me that this general sales tax that we're talking about, as it's written right now, and as I think I've heard you, is really a 2% BPT versus a 4% BPT, but we're just calling it a different name, right? So we're not going to increase the BPT by 2%. We're going to add a general sales tax of 2%. And it's going to apply in the same way that the BPT tax is applied as articulated in Article 2 of 11 GCA Chapter 26. Is that pretty much accurate?
Yes, but remember there's a difference between the BPT and the general sales tax. The BPT is imposed on the businesses. But now, when you talk about general sales tax, now it's imposed on the consumers. So that's the visible tax that you're looking at, which is the 2% sales tax. Now, this is really, now the consumers are paying this 2% general sales tax, and it should show on the receipt that this is the amount that you're paying. But the concept, because the way it was written in a way that it would apply to basically almost everything that is in the BPT language, that it would apply to reading the statute itself. It would apply to
So let's take, for example,
service, business, professional service, contractors, almost everything that's listed in the BPT activity report that you see on the form.
So the a representative from the Banking Association came in this afternoon. He says, I don't know how to apply it to the banking. How would you apply this 2% sales tax, general sales tax, to the banking industry? Because in the banking industry, there's so many exemptions. And the way I read this right now is that, 2% of I don't know, I'm not sure, 2% of what? In the case of the bank, which has many exemptions, in the case of insurance, they also have many exemptions. So it seems that and I understand there's also that other difference about, it's collected at I guess the sales tax is supposed to be collected at the point of sale. And the GRT, the business actually is the one that pays for that. So he has to charge for his products 4% higher to account for that 4% BPT, correct?
Say it again, Senator.
So I guess the difference is between the general sales tax and the BPT is, although we say that in the case of the BPT, the business owner is the one that pays the BPT.
Yes.
Okay? But in reality, he has already accounted for that in the cost of the commodities that he's selling. So he bumps up his commodities by 4%, so that when he has to give the government the 4% BPT, it was already included in the cost of whatever it was that he sold. In contrast, the general sales tax is collected there on the spot at the point of sale.
Yes.
Right? but the business owner still holds on to it.
Yes.
And on the 20th of the month, he turns those proceeds in the same that he does with the BPT. So it's a subtle difference, but at the end of the day, it's really an additional. But it's a question then of the 2% is applied to what? To the net revenue after you've taken out all the exemptions that are allowed by law. And I ask that because the language on page 2 does not say anything about, it just says 2%, and it doesn't say 2% of what. So I guess one would have to assume that that's 2% of.
Yes, the revenue that you collect on those sales or services or whatever that you collected on the professional services, commissions, and all these other activities. It's basically what it's saying. And like I said earlier, it's almost like a trust fund, almost like a occupancy tax, where somebody walks in and says, I need a room. Oh, by the way, the government says I need to collect 11% of the value of this room, and then the same thing, I collect the 11%, and at the end of the following month, I have to take that 11% tax and turn it over to the government of Guam the following month. It's almost the same thing that we're saying here. Somebody buys, whether it's a sale or retail or service or whatever the language on this particular bill says, they collect that 2% general sales tax.
Yeah, but I guess from the consumer standpoint, because all those really at the end of the day, the consumer is the one that's going to pay that 4%. It's going to come out of that consumer's pocket, whether it's the sales tax or the BPT. And it seems that in that case, it would have been less of an impact on the consumer if we just increase the BPT by 2%, because there's, under the BPT program, there's a lot more exemptions. And so, the business owner then doesn't charge as much for the service or the commodity, because he takes into account all those exemptions, it seems. So really, it seems to me that as written right now, the 2% sales tax is a BPT without any exemptions. Okay.
There must be something about sitting next to someone. I think we were on the same wavelength in terms of trying to understand what this bill really is about. And it was curious that there was so much support for a sales tax. Everybody was saying, don't increase BPT, business privilege tax. We want a sales tax instead. And in looking at that, and in looking at all the concerns that people have right now with the economy and with affordability, I'd like to highlight some things that I think people need to be aware of as we contemplate this bill. First thing is that a sales tax and a business privilege tax are inherently different. If you look at a sales tax, it is a tax that is paid by the consumer based on the amount of the purchase. And it's not an expense to the business owner, because the amount owed to the taxing authority is no more than what the consumer has paid. So whatever the consumer paid in sales tax is exactly what's owed to the state, to Guam. But on the other hand, a gross receipts tax is a percentage of revenue paid by the business or the merchant to the state, to Guam. And the difference here is that the gross receipts tax affects the profit and loss of the business, as opposed to a sales tax, which is really just borne by the consumer. The reason it's important to understand this is because what this bill does is this bill applies a levy of 2% on general sales tax on tangible personal property and any service business, including but not limited to professional services, contractor services, banking and lending services, foreign currency services, insurance services, and tourism-related services. So we have to remember that this really is what they can call a regressive tax. It's a type of tax that impacts the person with the lowest income level the most, because it's an across-the-board tax, right? So whether you earn $50,000 or earn $100,000, if you buy that bottle of shampoo or whatever it is that you're going to buy, the tax that you pay is going to be the same when you buy that one product. And you know, we're very focused on what the end result is and the dollars figures that it's going to realize in actual taxes. But you know, let's just, as we make our decision and as people contact us to express their support of this bill, let's just understand that really this is a direct tax to the consumer. So unlike a gross receipts tax, a business privilege tax, which is based on the revenue of the business, and the business can decide to either cut certain costs to not lose so much money or pass the added tax on to the price of their goods. That's how they determine whether they can make more money or lose money or break even, right? That's how they adjust in the case of a business privilege tax. But in the case of a sales tax, that's where the buck stops with the consumer. So it's you and I, and anytime we go out to do and make available any of these products or services, it will cost us now 2% in taxes. So I just wanted to make that clear to everybody, because somehow there's this feeling that this is the answer. This is what we need. We need to generate money. This is what we need. But in this case, where a lot of the businesses were coming out and saying, we can't support this because we're going to take a direct hit. This is going to affect our profit line. We're going to lose money. We're going to have to lay off people. We may close our businesses. It just won't be profitable. We're now shifting that burden of generating money directly on the consumer. Whether you are a person who earns a lot of money or whether you're a person who doesn't earn a lot of money, the effect on you when the two people go to buy the same product is going to be equally the same. So I just want to bring that up. I think that if we're really concerned about the impact to people in terms of reduction in salaries, reduction in services, let's perhaps consider where certain exemptions need to be worked in here. In many cases, there are exemptions to groceries, or there are exemptions to groceries and medicines, and maybe as a start, that should be something we consider. Of course, we're worried about also putting so many exemptions that the net effect is going to be nominal, and a sales tax wouldn't be worth the effort. But just know that if we're going to go with this concept, which will generate money, no doubt, it will generate money, but let's just be clear about whose money it's going to tap, and whether you're a poor person or a rich person, the tax on a certain product is going to be the same for you. It's not a progressive tax, it's a regressive tax. So the less you can afford something, the more this is going to impact you. Eventually, ultimately, it will help the government, but just, let's just be sure about at what level we're willing to pass a tax increase. I'm feeling very concerned about the rush to judgment, about having to come up with a solution, about being called in here repetitively to pass tax measures, because tax measures are they're so consequential, and they're particularly troublesome and burdensome to have to think through when we understand the regressive nature of a tax increase, whether it's to a GRT, BPT, GRT, or to a sales tax. Ultimately, you know, these two taxes they hurt the people that can least afford to be hurt. And let's just be mindful, if we're going to go down that road, let's just go down that road with that in mind, that we know what we're talking about. And our chore right now is heavy, our burden is heavy, and these decisions are very grave. But I just speak up, and I thank my colleague for starting the conversation, because in trying to come to terms with the different scenarios, what we can never lose sight of is what the end effect is here. And that end effect is what it's going to mean to the average consumer, which is you and me and everybody else in our community. And to what degree can we shoulder that burden of trying to help ourselves. But there has to be an understanding about what that burden is, and whether we're in fact willing and able to carry that burden. So I just wanted to bring that up to the committee. And I did hear, though, Mr. Camacho, that one of the considerations for an increase in the BPT and where it will be leveled is with the anticipated gain in extra monies as a result of the tax relief, right? So that's kind of the balance that is being contemplated here. Is that correct?
That's you're talking about the tax rump. It's basically the Tax Cut and Job Act, which basically, in the long run, what it's supposed to do is that basically when people, for the corporation, the businesses, they pay less tax. In the long run, it's supposed to actually create the economy by hiring more people and basically creating more businesses. And that's the trade-off between, for the corporations. On the individual side, it's really a big cut for the and a lot of benefits that they take on the individual sides. Besides the reduction on rate of 3%, they have a lot of benefits that are added to the existing 1986 code, or prior to the change of the 2017 law. We talk about that. You know, those benefits include basically the increase in the child tax credit by another $1,000, family tax credit that actually gives them more, a $500 family tax credit. So basically, it helps a lot of the individuals that are in the middle class people.
And I believe that there was a scenario that was played out right in the presentation at the public hearing this morning, where they took situations where they showed what, as a result of the tax plan, the Trump tax plan, what might be the gain and the disposable income at the end of the day, right? So I'm just what I'm mostly trying to do is find where what we know straight up as an effect of a brand new sales tax would be, and how we can balance that with any relief that is realized from the tax program. I know that to some extent you did, but that mostly affects the lower income, but the more the mid-range is not as fortunate, or does not have the same level of relief, right?
Yeah, you're talking about the individuals.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
wagers.
it's spread out. The rates are kind of like spread out. The reduction of the rates are kind of spread out. I think the highest rate didn't change; it remained. But the middle rates, there's 7 rates, and I think I think 5 of the 7 did go down by an average of I think 3%. So depending on where your income is, that would basically if you're talking about the individual rates.
Mr. Chairman, I think with what Senator is bringing up, it's on the chart, is that it reflects what the base rate is, not counting into the benefits that does exist, the earned income credit, and the folks that are actually on fixed income. That's why we only identified the 3%, but it is there.
Okay. Senator Torres, you still have the floor.
Yeah, I don't have any specific questions to Mr. Camacho, but I think what would be beneficial is if we had access to that actual comparison, because that's where, you know, in trying to make a decision like this, we need to see where the effect of any net increase to an average household will offset the imposition of an additional tax to some degree. Of course, there are other variables that we're working with, but I think that demonstration has to be made, because otherwise, you know, it is just a loss for our people, and it's something that I don't think anyone can fathom at this time, where there are so many uncertainties and so many risks to reduction in hours or loss of jobs, that, you know, we need that reassurance that we're not just digging a hole that we can never climb out of. But no, thank you very much. And I think what I need to do is just get a hold of that, perhaps from the committee chair who said he has that information.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Torres. We're still waiting for information for Senator Esteves. In the meantime, Senator Lee had a question, and then Senator Muñoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Camacho, for joining us again this evening. I tend to agree with the preceding speaker. I'm very concerned that there are a number of things that haven't really been fleshed out with this plan. I think primarily some of the things that come to mind, some of the concerns that were raised earlier in this morning's public hearing from members of our business community are just that we're unsure about the effect that this bill would have, particularly on our #1 industry, the tourism industry. And we just don't have enough information at this time to try to figure out how it would affect tourism, which is our largest employer. They have over 20,000 employees that are directly related to tourism. And if we are no longer considered a duty-free destination, how that might impact the way Guam is viewed in many of our different markets, many of our different source markets. And we know that one out of every 3 people employed on Guam have a direct link to the tourism industry. We also know that tourism generates over $150 million in tax revenue for this government. So these are questions that really need to be considered and answered very thoroughly before we go down this road. I'm also concerned with regard to the implementation, and I know that the question was asked previously to you, both in the public hearing and here during the committee of the whole, about implementation and how maybe some of our small family-run businesses might be able to if they don't already have like an automated point of sale system, an automated POS system, how they're able to tack on that additional 2% sales tax or whatever this body decides. And so I guess my question to you, Mr. Camacho, would be, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you have any numbers that you might be able to share with the body about how many small businesses are currently paying taxes and providing, maybe we can think about it in terms of BPT. Is there any way for you to kind of know how many of them are using an automated point of sale system or are that file electronically?
I don't have the numbers with me, Senator, but I think the proposal to make this effective April 1st is something that we can work between now and get those data that you're asking, how many small businesses. There's a lot that are taking advantage already of the Day Santos, which is basically, we can run those reports and find out if that's what you need. But
and that's on the first $50,000.
Yes, we can run those reports and take a look at the numbers and all the businesses. If you want to look at businesses, that how many businesses from what I heard, there's a lot out there already that can easily do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know the numbers.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'll just reserve the balance of my time to come back and maybe ask additional questions at a later time. Sujus Masi.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask that while I'm trying to get some information, possibly ask for an amendment to the bill in reference to the levy, is that we recess until tomorrow at 1 o'clock after the tax forum tomorrow.
Okay, there's a motion to recess to 1 p.m. tomorrow. Any objections? No objections, so recess to 1 p.m. tomorrow.